7 years experience in pastoral ministry and 25 years experience in business in the finance and mortgage industries. Mr. Bryant is recognized as one of America's most dynamic speakers and is highly sought after by many major networks, churches, and conservative grassroots organizations like ours. He is currently a senior fellow with Freedom Works and is founder of the group One Nation Back to God. He hosts a weekday radio show on a Shreveport station where he addresses current issues of race, politics, education, and other trending topics. He was a one-time NAACP chapter president. He became a conservative activist after his realization that the entitlement mindset of the progressive Black community is the equivalent of trading one form of tyranny for another. We probably know him best for his award-winning film, Runaway Slave. We hosted a private screening of that film when it first came out. In this movie, he makes the argument that it's time for a new Underground Railroad movement to help liberate all Americans from the contemporary form of a government-run plantation, which we call entitlements. Mr. Bryant is married to Jane, father of 4, and grandfather of 12, and for that he deserves our honor and admiration. Please welcome C.O. Bryant.
Thank you. Thank all of you so much. And with me is my bride of 40 years this year. And we've been together 43. We both were just kids then, but this year 40 years to same woman, same America. And I want to tell each and every one of you, it's a great day in the USA, isn't it? I am from Shreveport, Louisiana. That's my original home. That's where I was born. My roots run deep into the soil of Louisiana, and we even have Texas relatives as well. But I am the former president of the NAACP in Garland, Texas, right across the way there. 23 years ago, that's where I was. I'm going to tell you a lot about that here in just a minute, as well as some other things that we need to talk about as Americans. But first, I want to thank you, Tea Party movement here in Northeast Richland Hills, for staying together. Jana, where are you? I don't see Jana. Jana, I want to thank you for the invitation. Thank you so much. Friends, Freedom Works, the organization that I have been with for over 8 years now, is one of the founding organizations, and we like to think that we are the grandfather of this Tea Party, or the father of this Tea Party movement. I'm an original Tea Partier. I spoke to that 1.5 million crowd that saw something wrong in Washington, D.C. 9 years ago. And they came to Washington to say something about it and to do something about it. Nobody thought that we would stay around this long. Our obituary, Jana, has been written many times. Those of you who have been around all of that time, you know one thing, that you have suffered the slings and arrows of outrageous lies and innuendos. But the American spirit, I do believe, reside in places like this. I crisscross the nation at least once a month, every month on average. From Oregon to New York, California to Florida, and all the places like this in between. And I want to tell you something, my friends. It is places like this where Americans truly live. Not Chicago, not New York City, not Los Angeles. Places like this where Americans truly understand what the core values of our nation is all about. Friends, don't you ever forget these words, not mine, but as a preacher for over 35 years, pastor for most of those years, are the words of my boss, and he's talking to people just like you. You are the salt of the earth. Amen. And if the salt, though, loses its savor, it is good for nothing but to be thrown out, trampled under the foot of men. And one of the reasons why I think we're hearing the footsteps of boots marching toward conservative people is because we have forgotten our purpose.
That's right.
We have forgotten what our core values mean. We have forgotten that there is something that makes America absolutely unique and exceptional. That's a good word.
That's right.
There are people who are trying to brainwash our children on college campuses.
Amen.
There is an all-out brainwashing of our children.
That's right. That's right.
Going on our college campuses. And many times, your child will come home from school once they go off to college for Thanksgiving. And there you are sitting at Thanksgiving meal, having conversation, and it strikes you, and you realize that Karl Marx is sitting across the table from you. How did that happen? Raised him in church, took him to Boy Scout, Cub Scouts, the whole shot. They go off to college. And all of a sudden, you have someone who has been socially engineered. There's a fellow, he's about 86 years old, and his name is Saul Alinsky. So he's dead now. He would be about 86 years old. His son, David Alinsky, I interviewed him not long ago on my radio program, and I invite all of you to download the free app onto your phone, the C.L. Bryant Show. We're on daily. We're on right now, but I have my co-host sitting in the chair with me, for me right now. But David Alinsky came on to try and save his father's reputation. And one of you, I can't remember who it was, said something about the fight that we're in. We have to not seem like idiots as Tea Partiers. The progressive liberal media has done a very good job in painting us in ways that is absolutely wrong. But he was saying something that I think is very interesting for us to take to heart. He said there was something that the left gained from his father that the right needs to gain. And that is the spirit of unrelenting activism. Now, one of the reasons why we don't get so much involved in activism is because we're very much involved in trying to make a living. Pay our mortgage, send the kids to school, keep food on the table. Most of us, if you're not retired, at one time had a job. But there's a strange thing about the left. These people have more time on their hand than any group of people I've ever seen. How is it people in the middle of the day can be out burning down buildings, throwing rocks? George Soros, who is an 86-year-old man. And it makes you wonder, why would an 86-year-old white man fund a group like Black Lives Matter? Makes you wonder. found in the word social engineering, the answer to that. The social engineering is financed by people like him. He finances programs on college campuses. And friends, if we're not careful, if we don't understand that we are the salt of the earth, if we don't understand that if we lose our ability to keep this nation stable, preserved, then what good are patriots? We are the light of the world.
That's right.
We are a city that has been set upon a hill. And when I think about America, the grandson of a World War I veteran, the great-grandson of a Spanish-American War veteran, the son of a World War II veteran, I have a great, deep, abiding affinity for men in uniform. But let me tell you something. The light that is America, yes, it attracts its share of bugs because that's what light does. Friends, let me tell you, our president, who I've interviewed once and met him on a couple of occasions, and he and I shared the stage with my good friend Sean Hannity during and right after the election. President Trump is someone who understands us being an exceptional nation. He was not my first choice, but he's my choice now. And Republicans, let me tell you something about him. I've had the opportunity of being in closed-door sessions with him, particularly before the election. He is a very focused man. He is a very serious man. And I do believe that after his actions on Friday were seen by the rest of the world, I am seeing something returning to America that we had been missing, and that is the American glide in our stride and the pride of swagger in the American way. And our friends and our allies, and certainly our foes, are seeing it return too. Ronald Reagan said these words, and I do believe that even though it's much too early to compare this president to the shoestrings of Ronald Reagan. Amen! I'm taking him home with me. You can go wherever I go. But I do believe that we are going to be placed, if we join arms together and understand where we need to go. We're going to see a rebirth of that type of conservatism if we make sure that the politicians we send to office do what they told us they're going to do. That's why I met about 200 of you in Washington, D.C. about 3 weeks ago. It was freezing up there. Met Rand Paul, Mike Lee, good buddy of mine, Mike Lee, along with Senator Ted Cruz, Mark Meadows, and others. We were there. And this is the message that I sent when I spoke to the crowd. I told them to watch those politicians, those egg-sucking dogs that we send to Washington, D.C. Call it. Yeah. Now, I don't know if you guys know anything about egg-sucking dogs here in Texas. I got a feeling you do. But in Louisiana, where I'm from, we know what you have to do when you come across an egg-sucking dog. You got to get rid of it. Yeah. And this is the message that we want to send from Richland Hills, Texas here tonight. We need to send the message to all of those politicians and would-be politicians that we're sending to Washington, D.C. this message. If you do not stand with us, the people who put you in office, then you need to pack your bags and get out of our state houses and get out of our national houses. We're tired. Reagan said these words: if you can't make them see the light, make them feel the heat. That should be a mantra of ours at this very point, this very moment. You can't make them see the light, make them feel the heat. One of the things I like about this president early on here on this 81st day of his presidency is that we have not been able to make little Kim in North Korea see the light. And right now, I believe 100 tons of American diplomacy is headed his way in order to make Kim see the light. Diplomacy means nothing if you don't back it up. The last president, and I'm so glad that the age of Obama is over. 8 years ago, a big voice arose. And Obama was someone who had great promises. All of them lies, and the lies are still going on to this day. You've heard about Susan Rice. The lies are still going on today. And friends, let me tell you something. Unless, as the gentleman before me said, unless we do something now, those lies will poison the bloodstream of our American children, and as we grow older, it will make life much more difficult, dangerous even for us. The evolution of American dysfunction. That's what I want to talk to you about here for these next few minutes. The dysfunction. The dysfunctional family. The dysfunctional church. The dysfunctional political arena. City council, school boards, you name it, there is an American dysfunction that is going on. And if we're honest with ourselves, we have to ask ourselves, where did this begin? Now, I'm 61 years old, and let me tell you something. My grandfather, my grandmother, my mom and dad, they're all gone. But I declare to you that if they were to return here today, if yours were to return here today and see some of the things that we vote for, see some of the things that are on the ballot, if they saw some of the ways we allow our children to be, they would surely think that we have lost our minds. They would certainly think that we've lost our way. It's dysfunctional. And the dysfunction comes because of a codependency that big government wants all of us to become engaged in. A codependent relationship, and my background is pastoral counseling. In every codependent relationship that I have ever sat down with was one that was somewhat twisted. Friends, that is exactly where we're steaming toward in this country right now, is a codependent relationship on big government. A government that really doesn't have any money because it's yours. But somehow, our young people, and even people in your circles, people in your neighborhoods, they think government is some type of living, breathing organism that makes decisions all on its own. Grassroots people, you know the truth. You know that government begins at your kitchen table and it spreads abroad from there. So, what are we prepared to do about the direction our nation is headed? One of the things that I am dedicated to doing is this: telling everyone that I know about the great American endowment. An endowment that was written by Thomas Jefferson that includes these words that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, I don't know if Jefferson had me or my grandfather or father in mind when he penned those words, but let me tell you this tonight, that when he penned those words, he guaranteed that the great-grandson of former slaves would be here, speaking to other free Americans in America. That's the greatness of this land. In New York City, at a minister's gathering, a black pastor stood up as I was talking. Along this same vein, the president was running for office. And I was talking about making America great again. To give you an idea of how the poison is beginning to seep into the bloodstream of America, this black pastor stood up to challenge me, and he screamed out, yelled out these words: "When in hell was America great for me?" Young liberal white pastors who were there said, yeah, tell us that. Some were shocked that he would say it. But friends, that's exactly what's going on with the shortened memory of those who have come through so much. Our nation, in its infancy, had to learn how to walk, and we did. In our adolescence, during the Civil War, we had to learn how to survive, and we did. In the 60s, we had to learn how to live with one another, and we did. But then a dysfunction started to happen in the 70s. We were just about to cross the bridge after the death of King and Robert Kennedy, and this is what happened. Hollywood and progressive liberals found out that if you could make people laugh at themselves or laugh at a situation, you could tell them anything and they would buy into the stereotype. Archie Bunker came along. Shows like Good Times with Kid Dynamite came along. Chico and the Man came along. The Jeffersons came along. And even though we laughed at it, even though it was some of our favorite shows, let me tell you the diabolical serpentine scheme that has been played on all of us. Archie Bunker became the face of American bigotry. J.J. Evans became the face of what you might think of when you see a young black man. George Jefferson, moving on up, even though he was successful, he was still an angry black man. Chico and the Man painted a portrait for everyone of how Latinos were. And we laughed. But it's no laughing matter anymore when we're here in the year 2017. And there are people still pointing to the 70s. There are young people still wanting to act like J.J. Evans. There are black men who are successful, but yet are not happy with the endowment that we have been given by our Creator here in this land of plenty. Because we laughed at it. It became funny. Became dysfunctional. Paved the way for someone like George Soros to say to young black kids today, yeah, you haven't gone anywhere further than you were in 1964. And that's a lie. Anybody in their right mind would have to know that this is not 1964. And Americans, I want to tell you this. We may not have been a country that had the best times for everyone in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, or the 60s. Not even the 70s. But we were a better people. We were a better people who understood the core values of decency. Does anybody remember that word? We were a better people as Americans. And that is the type of decency that is being challenged on college campuses even today. A conservative, I go onto many of them. Sometimes there are many perilous things that can happen on a college campus. But today, anyone who is a Republican, anyone who is a conservative, walking onto a liberal college campus, there's peril there. You could be shouted down at any time. When I was in college, and Lord knows I've attended a few, when I was in college, it was a place of ideas. But now that is void. It is a place where only the college professor has the key to the door of our young people's mind, and that person is usually a socialist. So, my friends, we are headed swiftly toward an American slavery that we can avoid, if we will. When in hell was America great for you? It was great the day that it will be great the day that you decide to take advantage of the great American opportunity that's yet and still available. Now, in this movie, Runaway Slave, which will be available for you, and I'm not finished yet with you. It'll be available for you right outside the door there. I'll autograph them for you. It's been named among the top 10 political documentaries ever made. Dr. Thomas Sowell, my good friend Glenn Beck, Alan West, Herman Cain, all of them are here in this film. It's a packed film. Be sure to pick you one up. But there's an idea that we examined there, and I want to share it with you as we think about our American journey together. There's a design to make all of us bow down to big government. There's a design to put shackles on you financially, medically, and educationally. And yes, my friend, it may not happen to you or I, but unless we begin to educate. The scripture tells us that there was once a man named Joseph who was great for Egypt. But then he died. And the generations that came behind him, the scripture eventually tells us that there arose a generation who didn't know Joseph. That's where we are headed if we don't educate. They were slaves in Egypt. They were free in Egypt. But the generation that came behind them, the generation that rose up behind Joseph, the children of the children did not know Joseph. And slavery was something that they found themselves in. Now, progressive liberals have found out something about Americans here in the last 40 to 50 years that you must be aware of. They have found out that the slave does not necessarily seek freedom. The slave seeks comfort. A softer bed to lay on. A roof over his head that doesn't leak. A way to get some money in his pocket that he doesn't really have to work for very hard. An Obama phone. The slave doesn't necessarily seek freedom. The slave seeks comfort. And what he has learned, what the progressive liberal has learned about Americans is that Americans in these troubled times, in many cases, too many cases, especially our children, they will trade that endowment. They'll trade the freedom for the comfort. The comfort that everybody gets in education. The comfort that I'm going to get mom and dad stuff. And Jane and I have talked about this. We have 4 children, 12 grandchildren. Let me tell you something. I'm mighty afraid that my grandchildren want my stuff. And you better watch out for your children and grandchildren too. Because the way things are going today, they can't get stuff of their own. So they want your stuff. How do they get it? They feel entitled. How do they want it? They feel entitled to it. We've given them everything else. Sometimes I think we've been too good to them.
That's right.
The slave does not necessarily seek freedom. Progressive liberals have learned to tell the young people, we'll give you an education. We'll give you health care. We'll give you a house to live in. You are entitled to it. That, my friends, is a mantra, and it is a design to destroy this nation. So, just knowing the right thing to do does not guarantee that we'll do it. We know what the right thing is. But yet we find ourselves here in 2011 wondering what the next year is going to bring, even with DJT in the White House. There is still an uncertainty that we have in our America today. Now, as I close, I want to share this with you in the short time that I have left. People People ask me, CL, how did you come from being an NAACP president, a liberal's liberal, a leftist leftist, to being one of the most heard voices of conservatism in the country today? It was simple. For me, simple for my wife to make the transition. You see, I received a call one Thursday afternoon from Baltimore. That's where the home office was at the time, still is, I believe. Dr. Benjamin Hooks was national director of the NAACP at the time. And he said, Bryant, I want you to go and speak at a pro-choice rally. I was stunned that he would ask me to do it. Seeing and knowing that I was a minister of Christian education at the time at my church in Dairy Road in Garland, Texas. And I told him no. Because of my personal convictions, I cannot go and speak at a pro-choice rally. Now, friends, my star was rising fast in the organization. By now, I would have already been the national director of it. But I noticed that my star that was shooting up abruptly began to set. I told my wife, Jane, I said, you know, they just don't want to control my agenda. They want to control me and use me as a tool to control this group of people. That's when I left them. And we left and went to Jane and I left and went to Tampa, Florida. I was in the mortgage origination business at the time looking for a client. Flipping through the radio dials, I came across a fellow by the name of Rush. First, Jen and I didn't know what to make of Rush. Clinton was running for president back in 1990. And this guy, Rush, was just giving him the blues. The more I listened, the more I said, that's true. Finally got a chance to tell Rush that story. And this is what he said. He said, CL, I should have known it was I. Would be responsible for your conversion. He comes off pompous on the radio. He's a really, really great guy. And so, friends, my grandfather, he was an illiterate man, but as far as I will always remember him to be a great man. If you were to write his name on the back of this wall, he would not have been able to read it. Thus, that's why the carrying on of the initials that I carry. My name is Cleon Lewis. But when he named his children and when his father named him, he was the first CL. His father couldn't spell either. Couldn't read, couldn't write. So he named all the boys initials. WC, JC, even had an RC. My dad was LC. My grandfather was a CL. And I decided that once I understood the story, that I'd carry on that tradition. When I had a son, so I named him LC after my father, because my father named me CL after his father. Now that my son, LC, has had his son, he's given me a CL. My granddad was standing out in the field about 49 years ago. And back then, I was very Afrocentric. I had a huge afro. And I had an old car that I had bought and paid for, that I had put an 8-track tape deck in. Somebody here is around my age or whatever. That doesn't go over well with the young folks. They don't know what I'm talking about. It was blasting real loud, and I was headed down the road in Grand Cane, Louisiana, where the farm, Jane and I still own it, still own 64 acres of it. Been in my family for 150 years, right after slavery is when my great-grandfather and his brothers secured that property. It was once 300 acres, but it's dwindled down. Grandpa had called me, he said, come on down and I need you to help me set some fence posts. And I don't know about any of you, but we didn't have no auger bit. I was the fence post hole digger. Now I gotta tell you, if you find yourself on the north end of a southbound post hole digger, it'll make a man out of you. But I was headed down that dusty road in that old car, and I was playing on that 8-track tape deck, James Brown, Say It Loud. I'm black and I'm proud. Pulled up into place on the yard, got out of the car and looked at Grandpa. He was a pulpwood cutter by trade, couldn't read, couldn't write, but you couldn't beat him counting money. He had his own business. He had 3 pulpwood trucks. Hired men, taught me how to do it too. But I could tell he was upset as he walked toward me. His eyes were cloudy. It seemed like he had tears in his eyes. And as I looked at him, he looks at me. You know how the old men do. They engage you right in the eye. And he put his rough pulpwood cutting finger in my face. And he said some words to me that changed my life. Not that day, but 49 years later, I still remember them. And these are words that I tell young people, red, yellow, black, and white, all across this country. I tell this story everywhere I go. That old man said to me, Sonny, that's what he called me. I didn't go through all that I went through so you could be black. I went through all that I went through so that you could be free.
That's right.
Free to go places where I'll never go, and free to do things I'll never do. But Sonny, I want you to be free to speak your mind. And friends, if there is anything that will cure our American dysfunction, is if you, Americans, are not afraid to speak your mind. Don't let them cow you down with something that you all, except for me in the room, are acceptable to, and that's white guilt. Are you hearing me? There is a method to their madness. And friends, I am telling you that history teachers in school today are welcome to teach history, but don't let them rewrite history. That is what these stands for. Is the rewriting. of American history. And then finally, I want to thank you all again for being here tonight. I'm headed down to Baton Rouge tomorrow to be with my good friend Jeff Landry, the Attorney General there. There's an artist there Jane and I will be with. Is a friend of ours. His name is John McNaughton. And you might want to Google John McNaughton, C.L. Bryant. He has pretty much immortalized me in a portrait called The Runaway Slave. Well, he's about to come out with his next portrait, and he's going to unveil it tomorrow in Baton Rouge at our Justice Department. He's going to let it stay there in Baton Rouge for about 90 days on loan to our Attorney General, Jeff Landry. It's called Injustice for All. And he's immortalized me again. He's put me right next to John Adams in that portrait. So you can go on John McNaughton's website and see it. Friends, I want to thank you again for being here. But there's a question. There's a burning question that you must answer. You must answer tonight. You must answer it for yourselves. You must answer it for your children. Wherever I go across this nation speaking, many times I have to shake unfriendly hands, many times finding myself in great peril. Because there are people who would love to snuff out the words of conservatives and pray for our president. Yeah. Keep him ever in your prayer. These, my friends, are perilous times. It's always good to know that when I'm in Chicago or Detroit or Los Angeles, occupied Los Angeles, it's always good to know that there are people like you somewhere in America like this who's praying for us. There is a question that I need to ask you tonight. There's a question that I certainly hope that you are up to answering. My fellow Americans, that question is, are there any patriots left in Texas? Is there anyone here who will stand up for God and country? Stand up for the Republic? Stand up for America? The patriots, Texans, Americans, stand up! Stand up! Stand up! God bless you! God bless America!
I knew we would like him. Okay.